Frank and his partner go to question a worker who pulls a gun and flees. Frank chases him, but a car hits the suspect, and Frank hits his head on the car window, losing 70% of his hearing. Later, he's tasked with saving a mute girl with similar disabilities. Exciting events unfold as they confront criminals in a building. Don't miss this thrilling recap.
Frank and his partner Doug Slater are two seasoned detectives. On a mission, they head to the customs and warehouse workers. As soon as they start questioning one of the workers, the guy pulls a gun from his toolbox and points it at one of his colleagues, warning the officers not to get any closer. Suddenly, he starts shooting and makes a run for it. Frank takes off after him, weaving through the cargo containers. Eventually, Frank catches up, but the suspect fires shots and darts off again. Frank gives chase at full speed, but just then, a car comes out of nowhere and hits the suspect, sending him flying. Frank, who's been sprinting hard, crashes headfirst into the car's windshield and is knocked out cold, blood trickling from his ear. Let's rewind a bit. Frank is a dedicated cop and a single dad with just one daughter. After the incident, we see Frank struggling with significant hearing loss in both ears. To communicate with his daughter, he starts learning sign language. Visiting his doctor, Frank learns that in the last 11 months, his hearing has dropped from 50% to 30%. The doctor warns that he might lose it completely in the future, urging Frank to immerse himself further in sign language and to steer clear of loud noises, as they could further damage his hearing. Back at the crime scene, Frank discusses a murder case with other detectives, gathering intel. Later, while enjoying a beer at a bar, his partner Doug joins him. Together, they head out to investigate a lead at an apartment. They visit a woman named Ava, who, coincidentally, is also deaf. Frank struggles but manages to converse with her. They're hunting for clues about the killers and the criminals involved in a murder last night. Ava reveals she has footage of the suspects before the crime and shows it to them. After that, Frank heads to the bathroom to change the battery on his hearing aid, leaving his phone behind by accident. He and Doug exit the apartment, unaware. Ava notices Frank's phone left behind right as Frank realizes his mistake, wanting to check his hearing aid battery level by his phone. Just then, the criminals, led by a man named Lynch, storm into the apartment, seemingly aware that Ava has leaked their intel to the cops. As Frank makes his way back to the building, Lynch and his crew have sneaked into Ava's apartment and taken her hostage. Approaching the hallway near Ava's unit, Frank notices some shady, unfamiliar figures. Acting quickly, he takes a different route to reach the window behind Ava's apartment. From there, he sees Lynch threatening Ava, telling her they won't hurt her if she cooperates. Lynch asks if there's another copy of the video, and Ava shakes her head, saying no. He then inquires if anyone else has seen the footage, and Ava again denies it. Suddenly, Lynch tells his accomplice to move Ava to the couch to prepare her. Realizing they're planning to inject her with something lethal, Frank breaks through the window, barges in, and points his gun at them. He shoots Lynch's accomplice before he can do anything. Frank and Ava make a quick escape through the building's back stairs. They find themselves in a hallway, and Lynch is hot on their trail. As Lynch closes in, Frank opens a door and quietly signals Ava to follow him. They manage to escape and lock the door behind them. Afterward, they call a black woman for medical assistance for one of Lynch's injured men. Meanwhile, Frank and Ava cautiously continue exploring the building. Ava warns Frank to be careful. The woman is strict about the rules. She tells Lynch she'll only cooperate and keep quiet if they meet her demands. From a window, Ava observes two corrupt cops collaborating with the criminals. As the woman tends to Lynch's accomplice's injuries, Lynch contacts his crew, urging them to find Ava and Frank quickly. Quietly, Ava and Frank attempt to slip out through a pathway, but suddenly they encounter the corrupt cops. Following a brief scuffle, they duck into an elevator, unaware Lynch's men are watching through security cameras and reporting back to Lynch. With Ava's insistence, they head to the 9th floor because she knows a good hiding spot there. Lynch scolds his corrupt cops for failing to handle two disabled individuals and continues searching on his own. On the 9th floor, Ava and Frank find themselves in a unit where Lynch's injured comrade is resting. Frank draws his gun and warns him not to move. But then, the black woman doctor takes Ava hostage, threatening her with a gun, turning the tables on Frank. When Lynch's buddy orders the woman to shoot Ava, she refuses, saying it's not part of her duties and left them. Just as he's about to radio Lynch and his crew, Frank tackles him. Although his message gets partially through to Lynch, Ava quickly grabs an object and knocks him out cold. Frank and Ava grab his phone and use facial recognition to unlock it. Before Lynch arrives, they make a hasty escape. Frank immediately texts Doug, his partner, saying he needs urgent help. Meanwhile, Lynch and his crew realize Frank and Ava must be nearby and continue their search. However, Frank and Ava sneak out through the terrace, escaping from the back window. Lynch instructs his men, especially the two corrupt cops, to search every nook and cranny. Eventually, Frank and Ava find a safe spot, and Frank calls Doug, explaining the situation. Since he can't hear well, he relies on Ava to read Doug's lips. Doug promises to return with backup. Lynch and his friend are desperate to capture them, fearing exposure would be the end for them. Lynch assures his friend that they will find Frank and Ava and prevent anything from going wrong. Suddenly, the corrupt cops and Lynch's men bust through the door. Frank and Ava make a daring escape out the window, teetering along the narrow building ledge to another unit. In the stairwell, Lynch instructs his men to work in teams and cover the entire building to capture them. In the next scene, as Frank and Ava attempt to escape from the elevator area, the corrupt cops catch up and threaten Frank with guns. Ava makes a quick getaway and leaps to grab a ladder. In a tussle, Frank manages to toss one of the corrupt cops out, leaving him unconscious on the elevator platform. Frank jumps over to the railing but notices the cop regaining consciousness. He leaps onto the elevator and engages in a fistfight, eventually knocking him out again as the elevator ascends. Lynch and his associate arrive to interrogate the cops, learning that Frank and Ava have slipped through their grasp once more. Finally, Frank and Ava make their way down the stairs, only to discover that Doug has arrived alone, without backup, and has been captured by Lynch's men. To save his partner, Frank drops his gun, but he quickly realizes that Doug is in cahoots with the criminals, having become a corrupt cop himself. They apprehend Frank and threaten him with a weapon. Right before his eyes, they inject Ava with the same syringe Lynch intended for her at the film's start. What happens next is unclear, but it seems they plan to knock her out and dispose of her later. Frank is coerced into collaborating with Lynch and his crew as they drag him along. They take him to a room where Lynch offers him $5,000 to turn a blind eye and keep silent. Doug warns Frank that if he doesn't agree, they'll kill him. Reluctantly, Frank nods in agreement, and they take him along. Meanwhile, we catch a glimpse of Ava lying unconscious on a bed, her health uncertain. In the elevator, Frank hatches a quick plan. He swiftly hits the elevator button, snatches a gun from one of them, and with a threat to shoot, makes his escape, slamming the elevator door shut. Frank quickly finds Ava. Meanwhile, Lynch scolds Doug, saying, "You said this wouldn't be a problem," to which Doug reassures, "I'll fix it." Seeing Ava's condition, Frank searches her apartment for a first aid kit, finds a syringe, and administers it to Ava. Miraculously, she regains consciousness but warns Frank that what he injected will wear off in 10 minutes, and she'll pass out again. Lynch instructs his men to spread out and keep an eye on every corner of the building. Realizing time is short, Frank grabs a bottle of acetone and hands Ava a gun, instructing her to shoot anyone approaching the window. His real plan is to start a fire, drawing the police and fire department's attention, prompting people to call for help. He sets a fire behind the door to block entry. From above, Lynch sees the growing crowd below, realizing the situation could quickly turn against them. Amidst the fire and smoke, Lynch and his accomplice enter the scene. However, Frank and Ava have laid a trap and hidden themselves. When Lynch stumbles upon them, Frank douses him with acetone, blinding him. They make a run for it, but the fire spreads to several other units. As they dash down the stairs, Frank spots Doug and Lynch's men approaching. They scramble into a unit safe from the flames higher up in the building. There, they stumble upon a room filled with large speakers and powerful amplifiers. Ava suggests they use the speakers. Just then, Doug and Lynch burst through the door, guns drawn, searching for them. As Doug approaches the speakers, Ava cranks the volume to max. The deafening sound causes Doug intense pain, forcing him to flee. Lynch, unable to see clearly due to the acetone, fires towards the sound, mistakenly shooting Doug, thinking he's hit Frank. Frank and Ava huddle together as Doug, in his final moments, apologizes to Frank. Ava collapses again just as Lynch approaches. Frank hides once more, waiting for his moment. As Lynch checks Ava's pulse, Frank strikes him from behind with a guitar, knocking him out. Frank scoops Ava up and carries her outside, where emergency vehicles and firefighters have gathered due to the commotion. Ava receives immediate medical attention. In the closing scene, sometime after the incident, Frank and Ava are seen enjoying a concert. relishing in the singing and musical performance of Frank's daughter.